Does the nation have the stomach for another potentially major conflict in the Middle East? Let's meet tonight's panel to discuss. We've got liberal radio talk show host and Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, fresh off the outnumbered couch, features editor at Reason magazine and Reason.com, Peter Suderman, and Fox News analyst and host of Keeping Up with Jones on Fox Nation, Lawrence Jones is here. Welcome, everyone.
Hey there.
Hi, Kenny.
Happy New Year.
So what are you seeing now in this escalation? What hits you first?
Well, the response right now, I think everybody's freaking out right now without getting information. We've heard several reports saying that there were no U.S. casualties.
Do you think that's intentional?
I do think, look, and we don't know yet, so this is complete speculation. But if their mission was to respond back and not hit American life. I mean, when you look at the response so far, they said that they want to hit American allies say go after Israel, but not the U.S. yet, just the allies. This was not a U.S. base. They could have went out after our embassy, but they chose not to do that. And so I think this is the opportunity to reset. The president traditionally has been measured in his response before the summer.
I'm glad you brought that up because, and by the way, from CENTCOM, we were hearing that it was 15 ballistic missiles, 14 hit, 1 failed, 4 hit Erbil, and 10 the Al-Assad base. So one of the more attractive things to libertarians and the liberty-minded about 4 failed. 4 failed. Very good. So, yeah. All right. One of the most attractive things about the president was his notion, his long-standing notion that these wars are costly, they go on too long, they're bloody, and we have to not only not get into more of them, we have to extricate ourselves from where we already stand in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Is there any chance of him being consistent on that position at this point?
I think the inconsistency is what is most frustrating about this. Trump has often said, look, I want to get out of Iraq, I want to get out of Afghanistan, I want to end the forever wars. And yet that hasn't really happened. And in fact, we've seen these kind of sporadic attacks throughout the course of his presidency. And, you talked about this as a de-escalation. I actually want to home in on that point just a little bit here because, or as an escalation, excuse me, because this was pitched by the administration as a de-escalatory move.
Yes.
This is what Mike Pompeo said over the weekend, that this was an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Look at what's happening tonight. This is not a de-escalation. This is not this is not keeping Americans safer. And this is what I think President Trump needs to be thinking about. Is that, well, look, there are Americans who are under attack right now explicitly because as a response to the decision that Trump made.
No, okay, but I think what he's saying is, we blew up Soleimani, and the administration says, okay, that's it. We're not getting into anything else.
Just a counterterrorism
strike. But now, Iran launches missiles at American interests in Iraq.
Correct.
So now what do? We launch more, and then they launch more, and then more and more grows into a war and war and war.
And what we just heard was that President Trump has to now make a being about whether he's going to strike back, and that is a decision that he is going to be pressed by some of his advisors.
So far has been American life being lost.
So what if they just have bad aim?
Well,
what if they were aiming for America?
They had really bad aim because we're getting reporting right now from our own Brett Baer that said the Iranian missiles attack did not even target either the largest base housing U.S. forces nor the one closest to Iran. So they had really bad aim if that was their intention. Yeah. I think they wanted some strike back so they didn't look weak. But again, we need more facts. We need more intelligence. But right now, the red line has not been crossed, at least from the president.
And by the way, I'm going to bring Leslie in, but we were watching pictures of Qasem Soleimani's burial in Iran, which, not surprisingly, essentially coincides with those 15 missiles launched at U.S. interests from Iran to Iraq. Leslie.
The president himself said that this action was taken not to start a war, to stop a war.
But to prevent a
war. And we don't know if this is going to become a war. There are two things with Iran. One is they know their ability. And within, 9 minutes, Israel and the United States can make Iran a parking lot. They want to preserve their regime. So I'm not sure that this was bad aim. I think it was carrying out what they said they were going to do, first and foremost. They know that red line. However, I'm just not sure if this, and we had talked about this earlier, remember, if this is the proportionate retaliation in response to this, a man that they're calling a martyr now, that they would want. And in addition to that, even aside from Iran, we have rogue elements throughout the world that could act on their own as a result of this, and that could take lives, not just American lives, perhaps Iranian lives, and not just military, but perhaps innocent men, women, and children whose fight this is.
No, and one of the more attractive things about the president's non-interventionist policy has been the preservation of life and the promotion of prosperity. That's what people want. People have an utter apathy for another conflict like this, and I hope we don't get into it.
I've been one of them.
Yes.
I don't want to see war take place.
This is an area where people agree, left or right.
I have to be able, I think we have to take a breather and measure what we know so far.
Yes, that's right. And we cannot operate as though we're in the middle of something, but we also we have to be very trepidatious and encourage the president to walk lightly. All right, the panel is coming back, so we're going to have them stick around. Missiles are flying around the Middle East tonight, and the two Democrat frontrunners, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, are at odds over military policy. Bernie is hitting Biden right in the baby maker on his Iraq war record. The two are pulling essentially neck and neck in Iowa and New Hampshire. But last night on CNN, the Communist News Network, Bernie went on offense, claiming Biden's foreign policy record makes him unfit for office. Watch.
Joe Biden voted and helped lead the effort for the war in Iraq, the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. Joe Biden voted for the disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which cost us millions of jobs. You think that's going to play well in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania?
No, and I think Anderson Cooper has a hell of an RBF. All right, tonight a number of candidates tweeting that U.S. troops are in their prayers, so will foreign policy now become a much bigger issue on the campaign trail. The panel is back. Leslie Marshall, Peter Suderman, and Lawrence Jones. It's about time the gloves came off, Leslie. Bernie needs to, he really, now that Elizabeth Warren is fading, Bernie needs to run like a front runner. Well, not someone who was wronged 4 years ago, but someone who wants this, and he's doing that. And by doing that, he's got to bring Joe Biden down a peg.
Well, he's going to, and I mean, everybody thinks, the kumbaya ends. We saw he and Hillary started hugging on stage back in 2016, and then, definitely he went for the jugular, as she did, and they have to. That's what they do in politics. Look, there are people out there that will tell you, Jason Chavitz and I were sitting on Outnumbered one day, and he would say, sometimes you're at such a disadvantage because you're voting based on information you're given.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people that were given, obviously, wrong information.
Part of your permanent record.
Wrong information. Somebody says, hey, there are WMDs. Somebody says that civilians are in danger. And Americans throughout the world are in danger, perhaps, if we don't do this. Yeah. And you have bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Now, Bernie's going to attack Joe Biden on this, but quite frankly, that's not, at least right now, still what Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and
the government has a really bad track record in terms of telling the American public the truth about things like this. And it goes back, way before Vietnam. But you can look at Vietnam, you can look at both Persian Gulf Wars, you can look at Afghanistan and the news that has come out about the survey of the propaganda that the federal government was disseminating that was essentially lies. So I don't think people have an appetite for it. The thing that does differentiate people like Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders is their consistency. They have always been anti-war, and that means sometimes taking a very unpopular minority vote when everyone else is responding to the drumbeat of war. They're the ones stepping back. Does that make a difference here? Is the electorate ready for a peacenik like Bernie Sanders?
I think this definitely plays into Bernie Sanders' hands. This is an opening for somebody who has been a consistent dove for many decades in politics. And in fact, this is going to open up not just a line of criticism about foreign policy, but about Joe Biden's role as the avatar of the Democratic establishment going back decades, and all of their failures, and that includes criminal justice and drugs and, of course, foreign policy, all of those things. This is something that where Bernie Sanders is going to say, I have been an outsider this entire time. I have been a critic of the Democratic establishment. You represent every single one of its failures going back years.
But in terms of this, he's Cassandra. He's right, because he can look back and say, I knew this was going to happen. I knew we'd still be there, and I knew it would turn into this level of crap show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and Bernie Sanders is going to do it, and he has a chance of actually winning in Iowa. Joe Biden has always choked whenever he's run for president and gotten to Iowa, and Bernie Sanders knows that this is the time for him to step up.
No,
You don't need Iowa to become the nominee.
I don't think you need it, but it certainly helps. And if you're Joe Biden running ahead of the pack at this
helps.
point,
This is still a very crowded field. Joe Biden is still polling nationally at the top of this heap. But, you know, Bernie says, hey, man, you're too slow for this job. The president, he said he's going to eat your lunch.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
He said it was low energy. I will agree with everything that my colleague said about the flip-flop and the consistency. But there's another component to that. And when you have Bernie Sanders that essentially says Soleimani was assassinated and makes those type of comments, Americans don't feel safe. And that's going to be problematic with him, with the Democratic establishment. Moving forward, I don't see any of these candidates with a lot of energy behind them. I've been on the campaign trail with all of them. They all have small crowds. But specifically on this issue of Iran, there has to be a balance of anti-war and still strength as well.
Okay, you know what? This is what I will compare it to. The thing people like about Bernie Sanders is his wisdom, and he's like Yoda. You know, he's got the force, he's got a lot of time and experience on his side. But what does Yoda have? Yoda also has a
Yoda
lightsaber.
baby.
Well, he has Baby Yoda, but he was Baby Yoda. But he also has a lightsaber. He has a lightsaber, and he can use it if he needs to, and he could kick so much ass.
He could, but he's so reactionary. Like, for example, tonight...
Yoda's reactionary?
No, not Yoda. Yoda's very peaceful.
Exactly.
You know?
But people like that about Bernie, but if push comes to shove, will Bernie shove back?
Well, sometimes Bernie is so quick to shove first, right? He doesn't seem as peaceful. For example, you know, you have all the candidates responding tonight. Joe Biden, the experience shows sometimes. He tweets today, I'm going to hold off on commenting on
No,
this
don't
tonight.
hold off on comment. If you're going to be president, you can't hold off. You can't hold off on commenting.
He says until we know more.
Yeah,
But they're
Right?
all. But
That's okay.
They're all
That's
saying that,
okay.
except for thoughts and prayers to the people at the base.
Let's just
I understand,
take a step back.
and that's
They're
fine.
right. They don't know
And
enough.
I don't hold a grudge against the thoughts and prayers.
Right.
I think thoughts and prayers are always nice, but if you're running for president,
You better have an
this,
answer.
yeah, this is going to be your
Our
toilet.
own president hasn't stood up and talked to the American people about this.
Last
Well, I
word,
think
Peter
he is
Schiffman,
the
you have 5
president.
seconds.
there is no try, only do, and Bernie Sanders is going to do what he does against Joe Biden.
Well, Joe Biden's still going to be the nominee.
Chaos. All right, thank you, panel, so much. Great to see you guys.